Hello, disparate hallucinations of my delusional fantasies. MythForce just released, and I'm still looking for something to play, so let's review it. Same deal as always, just jump to the time on the screen to skip all potential spoilers, and for the rest of you, MythForce is a first-person roguelite ARPG with a retro art style themed around 80s cartoons that recently released to early access on the Epic Games Store. It's also worth noting that the game has a co-op feature, which is interesting and definitely adds value overall, but I'll just be focusing on the single-player portion for the review. You start the game by choosing one of 4 characters, each with a familiar archetype: mage, tank, melee DPS, and range DPS. Your character starts with weapons matching their class and gains stats as they level that are more favorable for that class, such as the mage gaining more magic damage. However, you're not locked in by any means. You can use a bow on your mage or build your tank as pure DPS based on the perks and equipment you find, allowing you to customize on the fly. As mentioned earlier, you gain experience over the course of your run, and every level gives your character some base stats, as well as a choice from 2 sets of perks. The first set offers 3 different random boosts to various character stats, such as damage, health, or defenses, or a default choice to heal 50 HP if you find yourself in trouble. The second set provides more focus perks, such as a 10% boost to sword damage, or a piercing effect to arrows. This system is actually pretty good, as it allows for some customization while still forcing you to deal with a bit of randomness, which really helps good runs happen more often. Outside of the individual runs, each character has their own overall level, which is progressed based on how many floors you were able to clear. Each character level rewards you with buffs for that character's stats and skills, called infusions and ability upgrades respectively. Both of these can be customized whenever you want. Occasionally, you'll also be rewarded with an artifact, which is an item that can be equipped to any character and provides some sort of boost, such as increased health or more stamina. You can only equip one at a time, but each character can use any artifact unlocked. Overall, a pretty decent roguelite function. The buffs from both infusions and artifacts feel impactful and allow you to shape your ideal run a little ahead of time, while also giving you the freedom to change your buffs if your build doesn't work out. Now let's talk about gameplay. Combat is split into the basic magic, ranged, melee trifecta. Magic uses mana, while the other 2 use stamina. You also use stamina for sprinting, and dodging, and blocking, basically anything other than abilities and magic. And when your stamina depletes, you become exhausted and can't sprint, block, or attack until some of it regenerates. Gameplay-wise, this is one of the biggest flaws in my opinion. While I think having a resource that prevents you from spamming attack infinitely is a good idea, at least in theory, in practice, tacking on the restriction to essentially every action slows down the gameplay considerably, leading to awkward situations where you're forced to sprint away from enemies, walk for a bit to recover stamina, and repeat, mixing in an attack or 2 whenever possible. The alternative is risking essentially immediate death if your stamina depletes mid-combat. I think this could be fixed by either drastically lowering the stamina cost on sprinting or just removing it entirely. It potentially might help to lower some of the other stamina costs as well, or have regeneration kick in a little faster. Just a few possible suggestions, all of which have been submitted to the devs in-game. Speaking of which, this is a great time to mention an early access feature I really like: the ability to submit feedback directly from inside the game. I'm not sure how much of it is read or acted upon, but it does feel good to have an easy way to send any suggestions or issues you encounter to the devs without going to a forum outside the actual game. But back to gameplay. Assuming you want to avoid the previously mentioned stamina problems, your only combat option is magic. And the magic system is pretty lacking right now. I only ever found 2 spells, ice and fire. I assume others haven't been implemented yet, which is only really awkward when you start to encounter enemies with resistances to the only 2 possible spells. Beyond that, actually using the spells themselves is a little odd. The fire spell creates a strong targeted projectile that explodes when charged, but if you just tap it, it's an incredibly weak burst attack. Comparatively, the ice spell seems to do almost nothing when charged, and has a decently powerful projectile as its basic use. But again, either one feels pretty bad when you run into enemies who resist them, making melee or ranged almost mandatory, even if your build is full magic damage. Taking a step back from combat, the level designs are pretty straightforward. It seems like the same 10 or 15 rooms for a level are just rearranged randomly and populated with skeletons, mushrooms, and other enemies. Each level ends with a 2-minute survival wave where enemies constantly spawn as new ones are defeated. I get it in principle, but in practice, these waves are best handled by just running around in circles for 2 minutes and clearing out the original enemies, as killing any of them before that just results in more spawning. And with that being the case, why even have these rooms? It doesn't really feel like a boss fight, and the only real rewards for finishing it are the store and access to the next floor. Beyond that, we have my favorite early access feature: bugs. In this case, they exist, but none of them so far have been game-breaking. For example, the Archer's R ability is supposed to suck enemies up into a single point, then explode. However, on multiple occasions, enemies have been flung away from the ability at high velocity, essentially ignoring the attack. Annoying, but not on the same level as the game just crashing whenever you start making progress. Overall, I'm torn on this game. It obviously is incomplete, most of the ability upgrades even say coming soon on them, and the developers state they plan to stay in early access for at least the next year, with plenty of updates to come. That being said, I can't judge a future game, I can only judge what we have now. And frankly, what we have now is pretty good. It's not groundbreaking or genre defining, but it is fun, and first-person roguelites are relatively rare, especially when you add in co-op. The only thing that's really stopping me from fully recommending it is the price. $30 for what's essentially a small indie game is pretty steep, and while it's possible the full release might live up to that high price point, as it stands now, MythForce just doesn't justify its price. So my verdict is a solid maybe. Basically, if cost isn't an issue for you and first-person roguelite ARPG sounds like something you want, go for it. But if you want your games to have the most bang for your buck, this is definitely not it. Try again in a year or so when it's out of early access, and that may be a different story. And a small caveat to all this is co-op. I know decent co-op games can be hard to find, and that feature alone could be worth the price tag to some people. If that's you, then go ahead and pick it up. Just know that in my opinion, the single player alone is worth 10, maybe $15 tops. And that's it. My search for a game to completely consume my time continues again. As it stands, Ashes of Creation is the only one I'm really looking forward to, but I'll keep hunting in the meantime. Anyways, if you want to pick up MythForce or anything else from the Epic Store, you can use code Cheeshunter to give me money. Other than that, blah blah blah, algorithm, blah blah blah, subscribe, whatever, and I'll see you all eventually.